Every night in 9th century Scandinavia wasn't just darkness. It was a living presence, a patient stalker standing in that fragile space between life and death. Because once the sun slipped behind the steep fjords, the whole world fell into a kind of stillness modern people can barely imagine. Wind screaming across the hills like the weary sigh of a beast hunting for prey. Snow packed against the ground so cold it could crack a cow's hoof. And deep in the forest, pairs of yellow wolf eyes opening one by one like embers about to flare. In that setting, the Viking idea of sleep had nothing in common with ours. To them, closing their eyes meant placing absolute trust in the design of their home, in the warmth of their livestock, in the thin layer of smoke drifting between the roof beams, in a defensive system built from experience rather than theory. Old sagas say that just one night of shifting winds, just one hint of livestock scent drifting beyond the turf roof, and a wolf pack could cross the yard in minutes. That's why every family learned to treat the night as an equation, where even the smallest sound might be a warning. And the strange thing is, in all that danger, Vikings didn't tremble. They watched, experimented, and found a way to turn the darkness itself into an ally. And if you want to understand how they managed something that seems impossible, keep watching, because the real secret is only just beginning to reveal itself. When excavations at Borg, Lofoter, and Kopang uncovered planks blackened by cooking fire soot and deep gouges carved into the grain by claws, people finally understood that a longhouse was never a house in the familiar sense. It was a full defensive mechanism forged from the fear of generations, a kind of environmental control device operating through heat, scent, sound, and sheer survival instinct. The paradox is this: what protected Vikings wasn't thick walls, but the deliberate chaos inside, the warmth of livestock, the heavy scent drifting from the byre, the creaking floorboards, and the dense smoke clinging to the turf roof. Reconstructed longhouses show that simply connecting the byre to the living area raised the temperature noticeably, while a wolf's sense of smell was thrown off by the maze of scents blending human and animal, turning the house into a single mass of smells with no layers to separate or identify. But the real twist lies in a detail almost everyone overlooks. Every plank carrying the marks of predators is proof that the longhouse didn't avoid the darkness. It confronted it head-on. Every post, every doorway, every airflow was arranged like a silent weapon. And in a Nordic night where the boundary between life and death was as thin as a single breath, the longhouse was the one structure capable of making death step back. In the bone-deep cold of 9th century Scandinavia, where a single night of shifting wind could freeze a roof from the inside out, the Vikings discovered a solution anyone today would call insane. They turned their livestock, the very creatures we think need the most protection, into a biological shield that protected humans. Experimental reconstructions at Lofoter and Kaupang show that when the byre was connected directly to the sleeping space, temperatures could rise by several degrees purely from the breath and body heat of cows, sheep, and goats. But the more astonishing part lies in something the old sagas only mention in passing: scent. In blizzard conditions, kitchen smoke mixing with animal smell formed a thick fog that clung to the rafters, then soaked into the turf roof, throwing wolves' senses into total confusion. They could smell life, but they couldn't locate it, as if dozens of different creatures were layered over one another inside the longhouse. That was the great paradox of Viking architecture. The more chaotic it seemed, the safer it became. Families slept in tight clusters, children placed in the center of the adults, and near the door lay a dog with ears tuned to every shift in the dark. Even the faintest whimper reverberating through the floorboards could wake the entire household, turning the longhouse into a living warning system powered entirely by natural reflexes. And the real twist, what kept them alive wasn't fire, wasn't walls, it was the breath of their animals. A strategy that sounds like a joke the first time you hear it. But that logical illogic was exactly what allowed them to survive nights cold enough to crack steel. If you've ever wondered whether you could endure a hostile climate the way they did, leave a comment and say whether you'd dare sleep beside a herd like the Vikings, because your answer might surprise more people than you think. Among all the quiet inventions of the Vikings, nothing has been more misunderstood than the turf wall. The 50 to 80 centimeter thick layer of earth that anyone seeing it for the first time assumes was just a cheap way to build a house. But when archaeologists at Hofstadter and Stung analyzed turf blocks still showing their original cut marks, they uncovered a secret that can make anyone living in a cold region shiver just hearing about it. Turf didn't just insulate, it was a living wall engineered to deceive every sense a predator relies on. The heavy moisture inside the earth trapped all the smoke and animal scent, creating an odor layer so dense that even a wolf standing right against the wall couldn't tell where the humans were, where the livestock were, or where to strike. It could smell life nearby, but it felt as if that life was buried deep inside the soil, the wood, the smoke, as if the entire house had dissolved itself into the landscape around it. And that still wasn't the most terrifying part. Turf absorbed vibration so well that every movement inside was swallowed, turning the longhouse into a silent bubble in the middle of a blizzard. Outside, wolves heard the wind, heard branches snapping, but not a single trace of human breath just a few steps away. What looked crude was, in truth, astonishingly sophisticated. A wall that didn't just keep heat in, it erased all evidence of existence. In the Nordic night, where sound and scent were the two deadliest weapons, turf was the perfect manipulator. In the middle of a Nordic winter, where temperatures could crack the earth and a breath could turn into crystals before hitting the floor, the Vikings held a secret that science didn't fully explain until the 21st century. Kitchen smoke wasn't just for cooking or heating. It was a natural biochemical weapon they used deliberately. When pine wood burned slowly in the open hearth of a longhouse, resin compounds and creosote rose into the air, weaving into every fiber of cloth, clinging to the turf roof and soaking deep into the wooden frame. That smoky haze made the entire house radiate a heavy, dense, indistinguishable scent so overwhelming that even wolves with a sense of smell, 10 times sharper than a human, could detect only a meaningless cloud of mixed odors. They knew life was there, but they couldn't pinpoint it, as if an invisible hand was warping every signal in the air. And here is the twist. The Vikings didn't treat smoke as a byproduct of fire. They saw it as the longhouse's cloak of invisibility. Each night, the smoke rose, not just to keep them warm, but to blur the human trace, turning the longhouse into a misleading scent marker. Predators couldn't decode. It was a form of ancient technology modern people struggled to accept. They didn't drive predators away with noise or tall walls, but with the chemistry of nature itself. Smoke didn't just heat them, it hid them from everything waiting in the dark. Beyond the turf wall and the smoke thick as fog, the Vikings relied on a form of defense so strange that many modern people would assume it belonged to legend rather than engineering. Living lavender fences, thorn walls grown year after year, braided from hawthorn and birch, driven deep into the frozen soil until they became a single interlocked mass no hand could pull apart. When archaeologists at Idavy and Legray uncovered roots twisted like stone-hard ropes, they discovered that these fences weren't just physical barriers. They were biological machines programmed by time itself. Hawthorn thorns were so sharp that a wolf only had to lunge once to recoil in pain, fleeing before it even understood what it had struck. But what made the lavender hedges almost mystical was the scent. Mature hawthorn released bitter, dry compounds that blended with birch resin, creating an aroma that drifted into the northern wind, tricking predators into mistaking the entire farm for a patch of untouched wilderness with no human presence at all. In the long night, the wind threading through the thorns produced a dry, brittle whisper that felt like scattered footsteps somewhere in the dark. That eerie ambiguity made many intruders, animal and human alike, stop, hesitate, and slowly back away from the living wall they couldn't see through. From a distance, the hedge looked like an ancient creature sleeping. But when danger approached, it awakened by making the intruder lose courage before they even tried their luck. Those living walls needed no swords, no traps. They only had to grow, twist, and let time turn them into something even the darkness treated with caution. And if you've ever stood before a thicket of dense thorns and felt like something inside was watching you, leave a comment. Because the Vikings may have felt exactly what you just did. When the ground was no longer safe, when every footprint left on a thin layer of snow could become an invitation for predators to track through the night, the Vikings and the northern Sami communities did something almost no one of their time dared to imagine. They moved sleep off the ground. The stabur, stilted houses raised 2 to 3 meters high, appeared across Hof and Roros, with upright timber pillars ending in broad muse-plater discs as wide as shields, making it impossible even for a young bear to climb up. But the boldest innovation came from the far north, where the Sami built the lanjaya, small cabins suspended on a single tree trunk, reachable only by a wooden ladder that was pulled up once night fell. When the cold wind traveled along the pillar, the airflow carried human scent out of a wolf's range, convincing them nothing alive was above. Modern research even confirms that at a height of 3 meters, scent molecule density drops by up to 60%, a number that turns this ancient strategy into something close to science. And the twist lies in its simplicity. Inside a lanjaya, there was only a hide, a tallow lamp, and a short spear, just enough for the sleeper to feel every vibration rising from the wind, from the tree, from the ground. Sleeping above wasn't about comfort. It was about sensing danger before it even arrived. The more we understand how they lived, the clearer it becomes that survival doesn't always come from strength, but from daring, to leave the place everyone else believes is safest. On nights when the ground froze so hard that even footsteps were swallowed by the thick snow, the Vikings understood that danger didn't come only from the predators lurking nearby, but also from the absolute silence of nature itself. That's why stilted houses and lanjaya shelters didn't just keep them out of a predator's reach. They became a living alarm system built entirely on movement. Once the last person in the family drifted into sleep, everything beneath them, the tree trunk, the ground, the wind curling through the forest, became a giant sensory membrane. Even the faintest crack from the base of the pillar traveled straight up through the wooden floor and woke the whole household in the same breath, as if they were a single organism. The strange part is that height made them safer. Up there, sound was amplified, vibrations were magnified, and anything touching the pillar had no way to hide. While the intruder was still feeling its way through the dark, the people above already knew something was approaching. This wasn't passive defense. It was survival instinct turned into architecture. And it was this silent warning system that let them sense danger, long before danger could sense them. By the late 10th century, when the Nordic tribes faced not only predators but also wandering war bands from the Baltic, the Vikings created something that modern military scholars still regard as a declaration of power expressed through geometry. Trelleborg, a circular fortress so flawless that one glance is enough to know it wasn't built to showcase craftsmanship, but to dominate the mind. Its 137-meter diameter was divided into 4 quadrants, its 5-meter-high rammed earth walls rising in a perfect arc, and just outside lay a deep V-shaped moat, the kind of terrain even a wild boar wouldn't dare test because its depth couldn't be judged by eye. But what truly unnerved intruders wasn't the wall. It was the light. Dozens of torches positioned along the moat cast firelight against the paleocarbon-hardened earth, making the entire circle glow like a burning wheel. A stranger stepping inside Trelleborg would be disoriented by the rotating light, unable to tell where the gate was, where the exit lay, which shadow was real, and which was only a reflection on the wall. This was the Vikings' political flex. They didn't need to shout or erect statues of war gods. With a single, perfect circle, they made every approaching enemy understand that this was no place for the faint-hearted. It wasn't the wall that protected them. It was the circle itself, a machine that manipulated perception, sight, and even the enemy's confidence. Trelleborg wasn't just a fortress. It was a proclamation that Viking order was so powerful it could command even the darkness to obey. There's something everyone in the Nordic lands learns early, but only the Vikings turned it into a foundation of survival. The final enemy wasn't predators, storms, or darkness. It was the instability of nature itself, the force that could change its face within hours and turn safe ground into a death trap before anyone noticed. And that's why their final settlements, stretching from Virka to Hedeby, transformed water into the ultimate line of defense. Ice moats weren't signs of desperation, they were design. Channels linked to natural lakes allowed a single released latch to flood the surrounding earth, trapping intruders in cold slurry, while torchlight flickered across the water's surface. What made this strategy legendary was its ability to manipulate perception. The sound of breaking ice traveled farther than footsteps. Reflections of fire on the water made the enemy think patrols were nearby, and the damp chill lingering in the air thinned human scent so much that even wolves couldn't track it. And here's the hook. They didn't conquer nature, they programmed it. That's the lesson that still holds more than 1,000 years later. In a world that never stops shifting, Strength doesn't always come from resisting the environment, but from making the environment work for you. If you have your own take on this kind of survival intelligence, leave a comment. Your perspective might help me understand how you see the world. And if you enjoy stories where history, science, and instinct weave into one, don't forget to subscribe. The journey is only just beginning.